So we're going to be talking about She's a Badass. My mom wouldn't appreciate me saying that, but I also wanted to start talking about, what does feminism mean to you when you were writing this book?
Well, feminism to me just means simply equality for women in every way. And but it was fascinating to me as I went through this book to hear what that definition means to all the 20 women in this book, because not one of them agreed completely with any of the others in this book. So it shows what a wide spectrum that word really has in terms of meanings. And so quite often I had to set aside my own opinions on things and just let people tell their stories and their truths as they saw it.
It seemed really important for you to get a lot of different perspectives from different age groups, different subgenres, different backgrounds of women in the book. And I really, really liked that. I was also surprised as well. What drew you to write the book? What was your motivation for starting the project itself?
Well, I had, over the years, I've done probably thousands of interviews, and I kept hearing the same kind of stories from women in different bands or solo artists about the things that they were encountering that really were unfair. You know, they would go into a club and they perform a show, and then at the end, the promoter wouldn't pay them what he had agreed to pay them. And you could say that would happen to male artists too, but it seemed like they would run into things like physical intimidation, things that probably don't happen so much to male artists. And so I kept hearing these stories over and over again. And then a couple of years ago, I had a literary agent approach me and say he'd read some of my work and thought that I would be a good author, and had I ever considered that. And we started thinking about different ideas that I could do. And then at one point he just said, well, I keep reading these articles you do with women. Have you ever thought of doing a book about women in rock and feminism? And as soon as he said that, I thought, there's a whole book of material there. And I just ran with it. So that's how that came about.
I love it. And it seemed to me like something that, you know, an adult could pick up and fall in love with, reading about their favorite artist, but also maybe a young girl, like in a y'all rock camp setting, could pick it up and be like, oh my gosh, this is the groundbreakers. These people laid the foundation, and this is what I can, you know, look up to, is what I really liked about it as well. One thing that I wanted to know was how long it took to compile all these interviews.
Actually, it was pretty quick, because I started out by approaching women I'd interviewed before, such as Ann Wilson of Heart, Susie Quattro, Suzanne Vega, Danita Sparks of L7. About 2/3 of the women in this book I'd interviewed before. And so I just went back to them and reminded them of that and said, if you like that article, why don't we do this again, only way, way, way more in depth? And most of the people I approached that way were available to do it. And then, of course, it snowballed, because as soon as someone like Susie Quattro or Ann Wilson signs on to do something, or Gina Schock of the Go-Go's, other people look at that and say, well, if they're doing it, I'll do it. And then it became much easier. And I got some people for the book who I'd never interviewed before, who I'd always wanted to, such as Exene Cervenka of X, and people like that. And so it was really not very difficult to get these interviews lined up. And I found when I got on the Zoom call or the phone call, or I went to someone's apartment to do these interviews, a lot of the time I barely had to prompt people to even start talking. It's like they had all these pent up stories that they wanted to tell, and it just flowed out of them so easily. And I was really honored that on a couple of occasions people said to me, I've never spoken about this in public before. And so I felt really honored and gratified that people felt that comfortable to open up to me for this project. It really meant a lot. And it meant that the writing was pretty easy, actually. I mean, I think I started doing the interviews in April, and I finished them in November of 2022.
Wow.
And so I turned in the book in January 2023, and then, you know, the publishing is slow. There's a lot of months of, you know, copy editors looking at it to make sure there were no typos, and then at the printer and things like that. But the actual book itself, writing the book, was fast.
Great, that's awesome. I was thinking like years to track these people down. Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
I just basically called in every favor I
had. I love it. That leads me to my next question. Was there anyone that you wish you could have been included, whether or not they just weren't available, or they may have passed away, or just somebody you really wished could given their perspective?
I'm really glad that I got some women of color for this book, but I wish I could have gotten more. I tried and I tried and I tried and I tried to get Tracy Chapman. I tried, I don't know, half a dozen times. And they kept saying, oh, well, we'll think about it. We'll get back to you. We'll think about it. We'll get back to you. And then at some point, I just had to move on because this just isn't going to happen and I can't wait any longer. So I really would have liked to have gotten her. But I'm glad of the people that I did get. I think it's a really good cross-section, like you said, of ages, different genres within rock, races, sexual orientation, even gender identity in some cases. So I feel pretty good about the women I got. Yeah, absolutely. I wrote a little half jokingly, I hope it comes across that way. Have you ever thought about writing about men? No, my real question was, do you think that it is now more normalized to see women playing music on stage or in these kind of roles now in 2023? Yes, but the reason that I chose to write this book about women in rock specifically is because I feel like that genre is lagging behind other ones. I, in my music journalism career, talked to women from all different styles of music. I interview country music artists quite a bit. I interview pop musicians. Those genres are way ahead of rock in terms of equality, in terms of, if you turn on a country music station, it really is about half and half, men and women, in those songs. That's not the case with rock. So I don't know why that is. I have my own personal theory that maybe, you know, since it's such a testosterone driven style, that maybe that's why. But really, it's lagging behind other genres, and so that's why I chose to focus on that particular style for this book. Yeah. No, I was also thinking, well, I hear a lot of, you know, female rappers, female jazz musicians and things like that, but rock, it seems to be kind of fading away, and we have, you know, like Boy Genius and people like that, but it still like leaves so much to be desired. I feel like I like that. Women in other roles in music industry have also faced discrimination. So we have sound engineers, tour managers, venue managers, booking agents, as well as music journalists. Do you think, or just like talk about, you know, your experience writing for music and rock music as a woman in journalism? Yeah, well, I think it's getting better. When I talk to women who are starting off as music journalists now, their experiences are very different than mine. In the introduction to this book, I talk about some of the things I encountered where people would say, did you even write your own articles? Did the editor write that for you? Which I really don't think would happen with a young male. You know, teenage boy doing the same thing, I think would have been patted on the back and said, oh, what a go-getter. But in my case, people doubted. And I don't think that's the case now. So I think it is getting better. But yes, it's not just musicians who have faced this. The afterword of this book is Susan Rogers, who was the recording engineer for Prince during his commercial peak, and she writes about this too. It's just that the musicians are the ones that most people see. You know, most people don't see the A&R exec. Most people don't see the producer, the, you know, the woman behind the scenes. And so it really is, I think, in a way, the musicians who are carrying that burden perhaps a little bit more, because they're the ones who have to get up on a stage in front of an audience and maybe have cruel things hurled at them, in that moment, in a way that I, as a writer, sitting behind my computer, can dodge most of the time.
Right. I love that. I love that it's gotten better. I, in another life, did like very small tour managing, and I worked in a small venue when I was in college. This was like 10 years ago. And I always got the question, which one's your boyfriend? And we talked a little bit about the next question at the top, but so reading the sections of the women who are like, I am not a feminist. I do not like that label. That is not. Do you feel like some of their issues and their stories are rooted in feminism? However, they don't like that label. What do you think about that perspective?
Well, I mean, it's not that they don't believe in female equality. It's just that they have a problem with what feminist, that word, has come to mean, the connotation, a negative connotation they feel. They think it might mean that someone's too extreme, too strident. They don't agree with the way certain female movements have progressed in terms of just the way that the approach, like that might be man-hating in their opinion, and they don't like that. So it's not that they aren't about women's equality, it's that they disagree with the approach, and therefore they don't want that label. So in the way, they're still feminists, they just don't want that specific word applied to them.
Right. Yeah, I didn't see any man-hating. You could do more man-hating if you like.
Yeah, that was a really important point to me in this book to make. And I was a little worried when I started this project that it might come off that way, and I didn't want it to be that way. But I was quickly reassured as I started these interviews that every single one of the women in this book, without me prompting them, made sure to tell me stories of men who helped them in some significant way. And I think that's a really important point. That we need everyone across the genders to contribute to this effort. It can't just be women making all the effort, and you can't demonize a gender either. So it was really important for me to have that be something in this book that I could point to and say, like, look, this is. It's an optimistic and a supportive book overall, I think. Women don't like certain instances of treatment they've received from men, but they were all careful to say, like, I don't hate men, I hate these particular men who did this really rotten thing to me. So I think that's a really important distinction to make.
Or the culture that they feel emboldened enough to say these things to me. Or absolutely. Do you feel like women musicians and artists are held to like a higher standard of talent and music excellency than men are? Or do you think it's kind of widespread?
I think it's getting better, but I do think that it's still an issue. It's interesting because one of the things that hasn't seemed to have changed yet, that still infuriates people in this book, as I'm talking to them, I kept hearing this story about women who are on tour and they go into the venue to set up their equipment, and some sound man or one of the roadies for the venue come up to them and say something to the effect of like, hey, little lady, can I plug in that amp for you? Do you know how this works? Like assuming they don't know how their equipment works, or, just kind of thinking that they don't know what they're doing. And it's offensive to these women because they think, how do you think I got this gig? I know this is my job. I know what I'm doing. So that's one thing that does still need to improve. That's something that I heard over and over again. And I only chose to put a couple stories of that in this book because I didn't want to get repetitive.
Right.
But that is something that I did hear over and over again. So there is still definitely room for improvement.
Or like they might need to overstate their competency of like, I know how to do this.
Well, then they'd all say, like, after the show, those same guys would be buying them shots and saying, that was amazing. Like they were stunned that they actually pulled it off. So yeah, I do think there's a certain amount of needing to prove themselves still.
Absolutely. I was also going to ask, if there are any kind of groundbreaking, foundation laying women or non-binary artists that you follow now, that you are really enjoying right now.
Well, yes, and I put them in this book as when I could. Sade Sanchez of LA Witch. I'm a huge fan of that band. Fifi Dobson, Bonnie Bloomgarden of Death Valley Girls. These are bands who I think are really phenomenal, and they're still up and coming. And so I didn't want this to be a book of just, women of a certain age, and that was it. I wanted to put in women who are younger, who are just starting off, and not just to get, the sense of how far we've come, but also because I believe that these women deserve to have someone say, like, pay attention to this band, they're really good. So I kind of took advantage of being able to pick who I put in this, to put in some people that I think really deserve that attention. So.
Absolutely. I really liked that it seemed like there were people, like you said, who are just starting out and just getting into their career. Is there any advice you think that you would pass on to someone who's just starting in either a rock career or a music career or art career?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that came up over and over again that I noticed in these women as I interviewed them. And one is that they had a thick skin. And I think that goes for anyone entering the music business, really thick skin, because it's not just, young women being rejected when you're starting off. It's everyone. I mean, it's so hard to make an impression in this business as a musician or a journalist or anything. And the other thing is be persistent. And I guess that also applies to anyone of any gender.
Yeah, absolutely.
But those are the two things that I noticed that all these artists had in common. These women had such different personalities, and when you read these chapters, it's just really amazing how the spectrum of personalities that are in there. But those are the qualities that all of them shared.
I like that. And I was also going to ask if you had anything to say to someone who was thinking about starting a journey being a musician or a writer, if that would be something that you would advise them to do, or if that is something that they should pursue on their own.
I would advise people to do it if you feel passionately about it, because if it's something that you can kind of take or leave, it's not going to end up being much fun. The musicians that I talked to, they would have these experiences that were pretty bad sometimes, like horrific on a couple occasions. And they picked themselves back up and kept going because they loved the music they were making so much. And, I wouldn't say that I ever had anything horrific happen to me, but I've had some things that were appalling. And it makes you really angry, but then you think, I'm not going to let you make me quit. But you have to really believe in what you're doing and love it more than you hate what they're doing to you.
Right, absolutely. And other than, just supporting these artists and supporting these books like this and supporting people in the industry who are women, who are LGBT, non-binary, what is something that we as people or even men can do to help the culture kind of improve or keep improving?
I think just being good allies, and this goes for women as well as men. If you see somebody who is kind of bullying someone on this count, whatever it is, just to step in and say, if you feel safe doing so, say, like, that's not cool, man.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. If you feel safe doing that, you got to judge these things. Someone's just a jerk, and you're just like, okay, I'm going to leave you alone. But I think a lot of what changes society over time is a wave of people standing up and making it clear what is acceptable and what is not anymore. And I think that's a really big thing now where, when I started off, I was an intern at record companies. It really wasn't uncommon to have the male executives sometimes even like manhandle you or, call you honey and things like that. And I just don't think that would be accepted now, because they know that the people in that environment would just not tolerate it. And I think that's what you need, is to have the people overall just making it clear what's acceptable and what isn't.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Always be supportive and call out behavior that is not okay. I know that EJ talked about it a little bit, but I am excited to hear about any next projects. Or is there going to be even a volume 2 of women feminism interviews?
There was some talk of that, but I feel like this book, I mean, there's no way to capture absolutely every single opinion, but I really feel, when I sat back and looked at this book, when I finished it, I feel like I captured a really broad spectrum of opinions, and I just don't know that I could really expand on that with a second volume. I feel like this might be the one. I would be interested to hear, another writer who maybe is more knowledgeable about it, to take this kind of same idea and run with it. Maybe, transgender people in music, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
So maybe it could become a series in that way. But as far as the women in rock and feminism, I feel like I did my best to capture what has happened and what is happening now. So
I like
I'm gonna
it.
leave it be.
I like it. All right. I think we are going to take some questions now. This is always the exciting portion. And we have someone over here on the front.
I'm going to bring you a microphone. So even though we're in a small room, we're going to have a microphone so that everyone who's watching online can hear you.
I was just wondering if there's anything that you would have done differently knowing what you know now.
I mean, I'm never going to reread this book because I will see all kinds of things that I would change now if I could. I can't really think of anything offhand. I mean, I really tried to think it through as I was doing it, and I let people.
Not just the book, but just anything in general. I know you've done stuff with Stomp and Stammer. You've done.
Oh, you mean
things
in my
with
career?
The Big Takeover, or any other magazines or people that you've worked with in general over your full career.
I think as a young woman, I was, like many young women, was prone to just kind of trying to make everybody around me happy instead of always standing up for myself. And I think I could have been a little bit more assertive in places and maybe had a little more success getting certain assignments where I kind of got elbowed out of the way by some other more aggressive writer just because they took a chance that I did not. And I'm not sure if that's because of my gender or if that's just the nature of being a young person and you just aren't sure of yourself yet. I guess that's what I would say to anyone else, if I had advice to do something differently than what I did, was be a little bit more confident in your own abilities, because I was getting assignments, so I knew I could write. And so I should have believed in that faith that other people were demonstrating they had in me a little bit more.
In your whole career, what was your favorite interview subject and which one was your most difficult?
My favorite would be Alice Cooper, because I've been a fan of Alice Cooper since I was 12. And so, to be able to talk with him was a dream come true. The worst ones, I've had some difficult ones. I'm not going to name names, though, because in retrospect, I could see there were circumstances that were making it very difficult for them. Like someone might have been really nasty to me in an interview, and then later on I'd find out that they were going through something that I didn't know about. And if someone doesn't tell me as a journalist, I'm not really, you have to be careful when you write these articles. Is someone being a jerk, and do I need to call them out? Or maybe is there something going on that I don't know about? And it's a delicate balance to strike. But I will say, out of the thousands of interviews I've done, I can count on one hand the ones that have been bad for one reason or another. And usually looking back, you can see that it was something outside of the situation that was causing that.
Kind. All right. Any more questions?
We have an online question from fellow writer Jessica Handler. It's sort of a follow-up to the initial question, or one of the initial questions you asked, but is there someone just in your career that you've wanted to speak to that you haven't gotten to speak to yet?
Well, I'll never be able to do it, but I would love to have talked to David Bowie.
Right.
Yeah.
Someone needs to channel him.
Yeah, that's and Joey Ramone. Those two, I think, are the ones that if I could somehow change things, I would bring them back and sit down and ask a few questions.
Kathy Klein asks if you can talk a bit about the differences among the different generations of women rockers.
Yeah. One thing that I think I really hope I get across in this book is the struggles that the older women had to go through, that the younger women are benefiting from, the outcome. I really hope that people read Suzi Quatro's chapter and Ann Wilson's chapter and Cherie Curry of the Runaways chapter and realize that they really went through some things that were horrible. Mm-hmm. And these things would not be tolerated now. And so I think that women now do have it much easier. And I hope that they will recognize that some people really fought for things to be the way they are now, even though there's still work that needs to be done. And, things can be taken away from us too. That's the other thing. Toby Vale of Bikini Kill talks about that in her chapter, where she says progress is not linear. It can go backwards. And so a lot of women in this book were talking to me when Roe versus Wade was overturned, and they used this as an example. So that was really interesting to kind of see that in action, at the time, and get people's thoughts on it. I wish I could have talked to somebody actually who thought that was a good thing, just to get a different perspective. Right. As a journalist, I really kind of would like to get the whole spectrum, but the music business is a very liberal place, right. And so while there are some women who are more conservative in this book, there was nobody who's that conservative. So, but yeah, I think it's just really important. I think that this book really shows that things have changed across the generations, and that work needs to be done if you want that progress to continue.
April Ledbetter online says, I love that you interviewed Toby from Bikini Kill. It seems like people often look to Kathleen for interviews. How did you decide to interview Toby instead?
Because I knew Kathleen was writing her own book already, so I thought she was going to have a platform, certainly. Mm-hmm. But Toby, I think, is somebody who has such a fascinating story. As I discuss in the chapter, she started off in bands with Kurt Cobain, pre-Nirvana. She was his bandmate, and in many ways believes that she influenced the way that his music, his creativity progressed. And doesn't feel that she's really gotten her due for that. You hear a lot about male artists who came up in the ranks together and get credit for influencing each other, but that really hasn't happened with her. People just say, oh, well, she must have just been the girlfriend, and don't accept that she really could have had any impact on his creativity. So I just thought that her story was a really interesting one that hasn't been told nearly as widely as Kathleen's has been and is in Kathleen's book.
I've heard different people talk about the media that the physical media or the actual technology that we use to consume music changing our sense of music. And so for those of us who grew up in the 80s and 90s, consuming music on albums, and obviously folks before consuming music on LPs, you spend all this money to buy a record, you're going to listen to every track on the record over and over and over again because it's sort of a sunk cost. But with young people today, discovering music in 8-second loops on TikTok, their relationship to sort of like sonic investment might be different. And I'm wondering if you have any theories about what that might mean, not judging young people for how they're developing their tastes, but just like curiosity about how music taste is developing now.
Well, I think it's good and bad. I mean, as I'm talking to people who are reading this book, it's interesting the number of people who say, well, I knew about these women in the book, but I never heard of these other women. And so as I started reading their chapter, went on Spotify, YouTube, wherever, these places they can pull songs up and just say, well, let me check them out. And that's something that was not possible even 30 years ago. I mean, you'd have to invest in a whole CD. I mean, you couldn't really dabble in things the way you can now. So I think in many ways it's good because it gives people a chance to find new music that they like easier, and I really believe that if somebody finds something that they like, then they're going to go and check out the rest of it. The monetary benefit to the artist will come. You're going to go to their shows, you're going to buy their merchandise, support that artist then.
Anybody else physically in the space with us want to ask a question?
Yeah. I don't know if I really have a question, but more of a statement that I just wanted to thank you for writing this book. I have a niece who is, as I mentioned before, she's in musicology and she has a passion of writing. She wrote for a heavy metal album review and she's a performer, but she really likes the study of music. And I have been talking to her about, back just 10 years ago or 20 years ago, there were so many women that you don't hear about. And, I helped, show her some of the women that you wrote about here. And she was like, oh my God, I can't believe they had to go through all this. So it's interesting from her perspective that there's all this backstory and it is a slippery slope that you have to remember the past. So I am definitely going to give her this book because this is exactly what we were talking about. And she wanted to learn more, but there just wasn't anything. So I appreciate you taking the time, and this is going to be helpful for her and, showing her friends or people in her colleagues about the history of women in rock specifically. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I hope that, I know that there are a lot of women my age who are going to look at this book and say, oh, I know who these people are. I'm going to get this book because I recognize these 3 people or these 5 people. But I hope that there will be women in their 20s or even younger who maybe don't recognize any of these women and just are interested in the topic or want to learn and might find some women that they like their work and can be fans now. And like you said, I hope that people will take away what has come before them and how we've had to fight for what we have now and what still needs to be done. So thank you. That's what you said is exactly why I wanted to write this book. So thank you. That's very meaningful to me. Appreciate that.
Hi, Katherine. My name is Hans, and I've just been meaning to say welcome home to you, Katherine Yeske Taylor. I was wondering if you could describe a little bit your feelings, how you're feeling to be back right now, and looking back at your tremendous trajectory over the years, where you have arrived today, and maybe try to look a little bit ahead, the future of, how you can make us curious to see what's coming up.
Well, I'm feeling very emotional being back in Atlanta right now. I mean, this is where I got my start. There are so many people in this room who have been with me on my journey for decades now. I have people here I went to high school with. I have people here I went to college with. I have my first 2 professional editors here. That makes me want to cry. They believed in me. They were the first ones to believe in my writing, that thought I could really do this at a professional level, and they are here. And I write about them in this book in my introduction, so thank you. My mother's here. There's so many people here who have really helped me along the way. And so when I was thinking about setting up events for this book, I told the publisher the first one has to be Atlanta. It has to be. So thank you so much for letting me come back and giving me such a warm welcome. And even though I've lived in New York for 12 years now, there's part of me that will always consider Georgia home. And the people here are a big reason for that. And I'm just so grateful that I've been able to have the career that I've had, where I've interviewed thousands of people who I respect, and now have this book and a second one on the way, and who knows, maybe a third one down the line. We'll see.
We have 2 more online questions, and then we can get into the signing, because I know there are lots of folks who are anxious to get your signature. So Jim Johnson asks or says, "I'm so glad that you included Orianthi in your book. After all these years, I feel she still hasn't received the attention she deserves, even with all the great people she has played with, including Alice Cooper." Is that where you discovered her?
It is. Yeah, she was the first female band member that Alice Cooper ever hired. And I thought that that was really remarkable, that she could hold her own, not only as a band member, you know, with such a legend, but, you know, hard rock, heavy metal. I mean, that's difficult for a woman, that setting. And I know she went through a lot to prove that she deserved to be in that position, and she did. And she also was the guitarist that Michael Jackson had hired, who he was going to have play with her at his Wembley shows, his This Is It shows, when he passed away. And so her story is truly inspiring, because she had these cases where the rug really was pulled out from under her a couple of times in a major way, and she did not let it defeat her. And so, yeah, that's the kind of inspiring woman. When I thought of who to ask for this book, she was one of the first ones that I asked, because of stories like that.
Amazing. And then finally, curious what your thoughts are regarding the current and future state of music journalism, considering the decline of support for music writing in general, and thinking of the Pitchfork and Bandcamp layoffs.
Yeah, well, music journalism has never been a stable endeavor at all. I can't even tell you how many outlets I've written for over the years that don't exist anymore, including Stomp and Stammer, which I know is a great loss here in Atlanta. I wrote for the first issue, and I wrote all the way through and did the cover story for the last issue. And I thank Jeff Clark for that. I think there will always be an outlet for good music writing, though. I'm an optimist. I really think that as long as there are music fans out there, people are going to want to read about it, and there's always going to be a place to do that. So I don't think it's ever going to die. I think people just need to roll with the punches. And every time I had an outlet fold, then I just had to really work to convince another editor to take me on. And as you go on, it gets easier. You know, once you convince a couple of editors, couple more will take you on, and it kind of snowballs, you know. So you just have to be, again, persistent. I don't think that I mean, it's unfortunate what's happening with Pitchfork and Bandcamp and things like that. And don't get me wrong, that's tragic for people in their careers right now, but I think as an art form, music journalism is going to survive.
I think that's a beautiful place to close us out, on a note of optimism. Thank you to Amber. Check out Amber's podcast online and all things. Check out Y'all Rock Camp. You can go meet Ashby up front, and they will tell you all about Y'all Rock Camp. I'm sure that Amber would be happy to tell you more about Y'all Rock Camp as well. And thank you to Katherine. We are so excited for you. Thank you to all of our friends watching online. If you would like to buy She's a Badass, you can click this teal button at the bottom center of the screen to make your purchase right now. It really does help us when you buy your books from Karis. So click that button, and then we're going to say goodnight to you. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you next time. And for all of